Hi, I'm Kathryn Delaney, and thank you for joining me. Today is 11/11/2020, which means that we are actually stepping through a portal of sorts, a gateway, where we are undergoing a huge amount of transformation and stepping across a bridge into a totally new energetic and journey in our lives. Today I wanted to do a few different things. First, I wanted to look at the astrological influences that are happening right now, because we are undergoing what is truly a revolution by means of astrological transits. And by that I mean that, the Earth revolves around its axis, but it rotates around its axis, but it revolves around the sun as it rotates around that axis. And what's happening right now, and I'll go into this a little bit more in just a moment to show you, is that we have kind of like an anchor sitting in one part of the solar system. And if you consider that all of these planets have their own time frame of revolution around the sun, when they sync up, it's almost like a setting of a dial of a lock of sorts that can open up new opportunities based on the influences that we're all undergoing across the Earth. So I'm going to take some time to go through some of those influences and transits that are happening right now, and then I'm going to take some time to go and do a little bit different of a reading. I am a tarot reader. I also study astrology. I also look at symbols quite a bit, and recently I was inspired to integrate the symbol of the Enneagram into my tarot readings. And by that I mean, I'm not referring to the Enneagram by means of a categorization of people's personalities. I'm more referring to the Enneagram as a tool or symbol to understand life and understand ourselves. And as a tool in that way, it is a tool of self-remembering and a means of which to guide ourselves how to actually get through the law of hazard in life. So I pulled a few cards for that a little bit earlier today after sitting for a bit. And so I'm going to explain the Enneagram a little bit more and also give a reading in that context. So there will be a few different things going on. I'm not sure if I'll be able to fit it all within a short time period, so I may end up doing 2 different videos, but we shall see. So first, let's go to the charts. Alright, so this is an overall view of our solar system. And by this view, we're actually in the center of this chart, rather than actually it being laid out how it is positioned in the actual solar system, because we typically in Western tradition will look at astrology not from a heliocentric point of view, which would be sun-centered, but from a geocentric point of view. And in that way, that's what allows us to have retrogrades and for planets to appear like they're moving backwards in our sky from our perspective, because they may be moving slower than our planet that we're on. But in the heliocentric point of view, right, the sun-centered point of view, nothing would be having any kind of retrograde. So just to give a general overview of this chart, we have Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, all the way around to Pisces, and this is our zodiac system. And within the zodiac system, we have planetary bodies sitting within different signs. So, for instance, we have, by our perspective, we have the Sun, which is currently in Scorpio right now because it is November 11th, and it is typically the sun sign of Scorpio rules this time of year. And then next out we have the Moon, which currently is in Virgo. Then we have Mercury, which right now is actually in Libra, but it's going to be moving into Scorpio here in a couple days, and then it moves pretty fast, so it will be moving through Scorpio fairly quickly by the end of November. So these arrows are showing you, for instance, the moon, because it moves pretty fast, by the end of November will actually be at 8 degrees Gemini. And then right after we walk away from Mercury, we have Venus. Venus is currently in Libra, which is putting it in a opposition to Mars, which is currently in Aries. And then we also have, right outside of that, Jupiter, which is in Capricorn, Saturn, which is also in Capricorn, Neptune is over in Pisces. It's currently in retrograde. It's going to be moving out of retrograde just at the end of the month. And then we have Pluto, which is also in Capricorn, and Uranus, which is in Taurus, which is in opposition to Mercury right now. And so those are just the positions of the planets, but they have a relationship with each other, right? Our universe is a sphere-like system, and so in that, these planets can have angles that can be of beneficial or, hard aspect to one another. And so oppositions, when you consider the energetic of that, they can be two huge anchors that are pulling in opposite sides, kind of like a seesaw. If you have a square relationship, which would be a 90-degree relationship, which we see here with Venus and then this stellium over here and Mars, it has this angular energy that is a harder energy that can be more challenging in our lives. Whereas when we have relationships between the planets that are in trine relationship or in 120-degree relationship, being that they are in the same element, they will have typically an easier energetic or a beneficial energetic in the way that they kind of help things along rather than the hard angle of that challenge. So just to explain that a little bit. So what's actually happening right now is that in January we had not only these 3 planets sitting in this area of our universe, we also had 2 additional planetary bodies in this area of our universe. And as I said earlier, when you consider that all of these planets are kind of like anchors of sorts around our world and in our planetary system, when they sync up, they have like a special weight or lend an quality to certain areas in our lives. So if you consider each of these planets are kind of like an individual that has a certain personality that's really strong, and they move into an area of your chart, they can disrupt things or they can lend energies to those areas of your life. And so traditionally in astrology, each one of these pies or areas or zodiac houses, as they call them, rules a different area of your life. And so when you were born, you had a specific ascendant, which means that the sign in this area of your chart was ruled by a particular zodiac sign, because this shifts, and just as this shifts, it will place the different planetary bodies in your different areas of your chart. So for instance, I was born with Virgo rising, and so this stellium here of these planets is actually sitting in my 5th house, which is my house of creativity and exchanges with individuals and new relationships and how I make my money. And so these planets have moved into that area of my house or of my life right? And just as this planet, Uranus, has moved into my house of self-study and teaching up here. So it can be useful to know what your rising sign is, to be able to understand and have a little bit of separation from what's going on in the world, and not taking it so personally, but more looking at it as an opportunity for self-growth given the influences that are happening. So with that said, we'll just go back with Aries being in the first house because that's its natural rulership. And so, as I said, these 3 planets up here are currently sitting in the sign of Capricorn. So what's the big deal about that? Well, first of all, let's consider that it takes Pluto 248 years to move around this system, right? And it takes Saturn 29.5 years to move around this system because it's closer to us. And then a little bit closer to that, we have Jupiter, and Jupiter takes 84 years to move around this entire system. Okay, so when they sync up, these planets, because they move so slow, have a really strong influence and shift in this area of our life. And traditionally, Capricorn governs social order and how things are done in society and money. And we are currently experiencing a really big shift in this area of global life, to say it as simply as possible. And the reason why is because we have this planet Pluto, which is all about transformation. We have the planet Saturn, which is all about responsibility, and it naturally governs this house. So it's that which in us, holds us responsible and accountable for our behaviors and what we go out and do in life, and how we, like, our life path and our sense of authority within ourselves. And it's also just authority in general. And then we also have Jupiter, which Jupiter is typically considered a beneficial planet, and it's like the Santa Claus of the zodiac. It brings gifts traditionally, but it's lending its big energy to these other 2 energies, which in my opinion is probably why we've had such a rough year this year, with what's been going on as far as where we've been restricted and what we can do, and what's happening and in general. And then at the same time that we have this going on, the reason why I say we're going through this gateway right now is because these planets are finishing up their area in their energy in this sign. And by the very end of the year, right around the 21st of December, we're going to see them shift into Aquarius. And they're actually, Pluto and Jupiter is in conjunction right now. And so with them being in conjunction, it could actually be really big monetary shifts, and also really big beneficial monetary shifts for certain individuals who have aspects to this area of their chart, or have planets in this area of their natal chart, because it has that transformative beneficial energy that's happening right now within this conjunction. And with that said, they are going to be shifting over the next month and a half into Aquarius, and in that time period we will see a lot of what we've been experiencing shift, and kind of get a better sense of where things are actually going. Alongside that, we also have this relationship that's happening right now with Mars, which has been in retrograde for about the last month and a half, and it's coming out of retrograde in the next couple days. And so it's actually coming out of retrograde on the same day as the new moon. It's stationing direct, November 14th. And so Mars is all about our inner fire and what motivates us, and where we get inspired to go do things and go out into the world. It's our own fiery energy, right? It's that playful, kid-like energy, and it's been in square relationship to these planets for the last few months, and it's been in retrograde specifically for the last few months, which means that it's kind of like a kid who's been wanting to go out and do all these different things, and they've been told they have to stay inside, right? Like they get impatient, and we're seeing that planet go from being retrograde to going stationary direct, and we're seeing it start to move in its natural movement, which means that we're actually going to see a lot of things that have been on hold start to shift and start to move. And so by that means we're also experiencing kind of like this stepping through the gateway, right? Like stepping through the doorway into something new, into a new experience. It's also in opposition right now to Venus, which is also experiencing a square relationship to this. So consider that, you know, Venus is in its natural rulership in Libra, and it's like having the cosmic couple, or the couple of the cosmos, be in total opposition to each other, and kind of having this arm wrestling over, you know, where to put our energy, and what is the most essential thing to do. So it right now can be a time where we can get swept away in, you know, arguments and points of view with one another that are combative, so it calls upon the importance for us to have, you know, more of a nurturing understanding and compassionate understanding with one another. Venus is going to be moving into Scorpio by the end of the month, and it's also going to be, so we basically have this understanding of relationships and how we interact with people moving into a place of transformation and change. And so in that way, we are also going to be experiencing some changes and some shifts as we move forward into the end of November. And one thing to consider is that, you know, just by the time of year, the Scorpio time of year is a time where we do let go of things, and we purge things that are no longer useful for us, that are no longer practical for us, and having a sense of compassion and understanding with ourselves so that we can do that and do it in a kind way with ourselves, or, you know, the things in our lives that we are letting go of, in a place of gratitude, you know. And it's really important that we do this so that when we move and the energetics move into Sagittarius, which has that kind of Centaurian relationship of, you know, the half man, half horse that's shooting his arrow into the sky at high aim, he has to let go of things and be willing to walk away from those things that aren't working and that are no longer useful, so that they can actually move towards the next step of what they want to create. And that's what we're doing right now. We're undergoing the end of a purging process so that we can then step through that new gateway toward a new beginning. And the new beginning is set by the new moon that we're having on the 14th of November in Scorpio. So it's a good time to be, you know, putting your intentions and setting your mindset on things that you want to grow in your life, and seeds that you want to plant into the ground to grow in the coming year. Because at this time of year, just like the, you know, environment outside in the northern hemisphere, where the trees and the, you know, perennials are drawing their energy inward to sustain through the winter and to be able to burst forth again next spring, we also are undergoing that process as well. And so the last bit on the astrology piece that I would like to speak about for a little bit is Uranus. And Uranus is a planet that brings unexpected changes and unavoidable changes to situations that are outworn and that no longer serve us and that prevent us from progress. And so if you consider a planet that literally comes and shakes things up in an area that isn't working because nobody is willing to change things. And it's in a place of Taurus, which means that, that which we've had in our lives that has been our sense of values and our sense of stability, it has had a really big shake up over the last 2 years because that's when Uranus moved into Taurus. And it's going to be going through that area or that sign for another 4.5 or so years. And where that's specifically going to be affecting you, again, is dependent on your rising sign. So even though it's in Taurus, it's still going to be in Taurus no matter what your rising sign is. If your rising sign is Sagittarius, for instance, it's going to put this big area of change in your house that reflects your work, your day-to-day work, situations involving preventative health, small animals and pets, but mostly your work environment, right? If you are, if you're Scorpio rising, it's going to put it in your house of relationships. If you are Libra rising, it's going to put it in your house of secrets and taboo subjects, as well as sex. So you could have like a total different idea and shift in how you interact with people and what you do, as far as maybe you're overcoming addictions or having some really hard lessons around addictions. So depending on what your rising sign is, these planets are going to be affecting that area of your house, just because that's where they're placed right now. And when you were born, you had these planets all in a specific placement when you first took your first breath of air. And so they will also have relationships to these planets as these planets create transits, because you are an imprint of that cosmic and stellar energy. So that's what astrologists do. They walk you through where these planets are affecting you in transits. And I, of course, can do that as well. But I just wanted to give you all an overview of that as far as this gateway that we are moving through, and some reflection on some of the shifts and bigger things that have been happening globally this year, so that you don't take it so personally, that you realize that we all are on this journey and we take steps towards the next moment each and every day, and that our life is all about becoming. And right now we are in a time of a major revolution, because these planets are literally creating it in the world, and they're getting ready to shift, right, to revolve together into Aquarius around the beginning of the new year. So that is the little bit on astrology for the end of November. If you would like some information on how they are affecting you personally, feel free to reach out so we can set up some time to look at your chart. I also will be setting up annual chart readings for the coming year, if you would like to set up some time to do that as well. And so now I'm going to go ahead and go into the Enneagram reading that I was discussing earlier, and to just give a little bit of an explanation of that. So, some of you may be familiar with this symbol. It has become more popular in recent years as a way of categorizing different personalities. And I have worked with it as a symbol in a different light. I understand it as a mathematical symbol that actually depicts how we move through life, and it is a tool of self-remembering. And by that I mean, if we look at life and our course of how we move through life, a lot of us would assume that we move in a straight line. But if we consider, if we were to shoot an arrow and we were to shoot it toward a target, we would actually have to consider physics, right? Like, there's nothing that gets moved in a straight line. You have to consider there might be wind, there might be rain, there might be a bird, there might be, a Nerf ball, something that actually moves in front of that arrow so that it doesn't hit its target, or it knocks it off course, or you don't actually hit the target. So there's more than just straight lines in the universe. Things move in a circular way. And so when you see circles in symbolism, it is usually representing that the universe is circular and that things move in a circular nature. So this symbol, right off the bat, if you were to look at it and follow the numbers, you would see it as, following 1 to 9 is a matter of sequence and just going through day to day. So if you were, for instance, wanting to attain some goal, you would think you would just walk in this line to get there. Well, the Enneagram is actually telling of something that's quite different to that. When you consider how the actual symbol is drawn, it hints a bit to it, but if you were to write down the sequence of numbers and follow the lines, you have 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7. 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7. And those numbers repeat themselves. And then you also have the 3 numbers 3, 6, 9, which are also connected in a form of a trinity, but they are separate than those other lines. And so why is that, right? Like, why is that? And where else do we see that symbol? Well, in esoteric studies, when you look at the symbol of the Enneagram, it is depicting of 22 divided by 7, right? 3.142857, repeating. And so what that is telling us of is 22, like where else do we see the number 22? Well, 22 is a master number. We also see 22 in the Tarot system. There's 22 major arcana, and each of those major arcana speak to a major life lesson. Those 22 major arcana are made up of the 3 mother cards that represent air, fire, and water, the 12 zodiac signs, and the 7 first found planetary bodies. So you have 22 major arcana. And then you have the number 7, which is the combination of the law of 3, which is the sacred trinity, and the law of 4, which is the law of the elements combined. And the number 7 is also the 7 octave system. And so what 22 divided by 7 is a symbolic representation of the circles that move in our life and how we move around and evolve and become within the context of these 22 windows or illustrations of our becoming and the 7 laws. And so this is a representation of how one can actually move through the law of hazard and getting caught up in things through the way of identification, and actually use the tool of self-remembering as a way to do that. So, you know, the numbers themselves all have meaning in numerology. For instance, you know, 1 is the initiation of new beginnings, 2 is reflection, 3 is an ideal number. It's a sacred trinity, so you have the active, the passive, and the neutral here. So this would be the neutral force. 4 is a number of a stability. It's also the number of earth. This would be fire, water, air, earth. Then we have the number 5, which is a number that's depicting of change and time. We have the number of 6, which is a number of balance, and also, right, balance, and also a number after time, we add 1 more, we actually get a sense of history. Through history, we actually get a sense of knowledge. Through that knowledge, we get an understanding, and through the understanding, we actually reach a sense of completion, which is the number 9. And then the number 10, of course, just reduces to the number 1, which begins a new Enneagram. But ultimately, the number 10 is a number of crystallization in astrology, for instance. I'm sorry, in tarot, for instance, numerology. And it then becomes the new 1 for the next Enneagram. So that's explanation of the actual numbers. I was inspired the other day to actually combine the systems of tarot with the Enneagram as a layout, and to actually read it in a way of how it might help us move through this gateway and this doorway that we're actually going through right now. So I drew 10 cards for us today. Let's see here. All right. All right, so as I explained in the drawing, this is going to be similar in that this is going to be card number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. This would be the number 10 in the sequence of the drawing that I just shared, or the diagram that I just shared with you all. And so we're going to take a journey through the Enneagram and through this gateway that we are currently moving through by way of it being 1111. So in the first position, what's initiating this big shift right now actually is the Empress. And the Empress is a card that is ruled by Venus, right? And as I had mentioned earlier, Venus is in Libra right now. She's in her rulership right now. And when you consider that we have this square relationship happening between Venus and the planets of Jupiter and Pluto, and then an opposition to Mars, which is also in square relationship to those big fellas out there, Jupiter and Pluto, and this angle of this T-square is actually turning. So it's as if this initiating force of Venus is starting to move this shift, quite literally. And this kind of gives me a sense of hope, to be honest. I think we've all been through quite a bit this last year, and if anything, I hope it's given us a sense of compassion and grace for one another. And this is reminding us that where we put our attention to and is going to create our world, right? Venus is all about that seed of what we're planting. She's the mother. She's literally the pregnant woman. So it's a time to actually start putting little bits of time towards your ideas and inspirations that really do stir your heart, even if it's just a little bit of time each week. And to know that you will harvest this, by the end of this whole process. Now, we're going to go from this first position, rather than going to this number 2 position, we are actually, and these were actually mixed up when I put them out. So there you go, boom. Instead of going to this number 2 position, we're actually going to go to number 4, right? Because we have 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7. So when we start something new, as much as we'd like to move towards the next step, sometimes knowing that next step can be really limiting. And what can help us in being able to get through this step is to actually look forward to that which is going to be stabilizing in this idea, okay? And what do I mean by that? So in this position, the 4th position, we have the 2 of Swords. And the 2 of Swords, if you look at the character in the card, they have a blindfold on. They're not looking out to the world for stability. They're looking inward. They're having an inward sense of justice with the situation. And that is what is going to bring stability in this new beginning and this new shift and this new seed that you're going to be planting. And what do I mean by that, right? So consider that, for instance, I've worked in greenhouses. I've worked in this family-owned greenhouse for the last 8 years, part-time, while I do a lot of other jobs. But I love working in the greenhouse, and it's a family-run greenhouse. So I love working there. I learned a lot in working from plants. And one thing that you learn in working with plants is that there is a timeline of when they like to flower and what they need to flower, right? And so they have this own timeline that is going to happen in time. And you know that if you give yourself and you give your idea what it needs, it will flower. It will, come to fruit. And it's a sense of knowing. And it's a sense of knowing that comes inwardly, from an inward-centered place, not from external people or external circumstances. So, when looking at what is going to stabilize this in your life here, we have to depend on our own sense of what we see and what we know is possible. And even though we may not see what it's going to look like in a physical sense in how to get there, knowing that it is going to happen is going to help bring together the elements that bring it into form. Okay? And knowing that, you can reflect back into this position of number 2 and start to get a vision of what your next step is, because the Emperor is associated with Aries energy, and the Emperor is the character in the major arcana that brings order to chaos, right? So instead of getting swept away in the winds of what other people are doing and saying and talking about, this is a person who focuses on what they need to focus on. And that is represented by this window that's up here in the mountain. You may not be able to see it very well. There's a little window up there, which is all about our point of view and our perspective on things, right? So how does one bring order to chaos? And where can we do that in our life? That's what this number 2 card, which is what we're reflecting on right now, which will actually help us move forward in this direction, right? So we went from number 1 to number 4 to number 2, okay? And now from that position, we have 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7, right? So from number 2, where we reflect, in order to actually be able to get to this point, which is safety and security, we actually have to look forward even further to the point number 8. And that's where it's really easy to get stuck in this kind of law of hazard, in a way that we get stuck on this side of like repeating what we're doing because we can't see how we're actually going to get over here. And so the number 8 in numerology is a number about understanding. And this card is the Charioteer, which is in traditional decks called the Chariot. It's ruled by Cancer and the Moon, and it is also another major arcana. So this is the energy of, you know, what gets you moving out of your comfort zone, right? And what's really interesting about this card and this card is that, you know, we need to look at this card and move out of our comfort zone to actually get a sense of safety and security. And that seems, you know, contradicting, but what's interesting about it is that a lot of people live in a place of fear, and they live their lives trying to create stability, trying to prevent the worst from happening. But there isn't really any way, you know, if we look at this year, there isn't any way we could have prevented or prepared ourselves for what happened this year and what shifted this year. But in some ways, you know, going out on and moving towards a new direction and letting our own sense of right and wrong drive our movement in that moment, that is going to give us a better sense of safety and security, because we will have a sense of self and confidence in moving out into that new terrain, because we'll see what we are actually capable of. You know, this card, it is a major arcana, it's ruled by the moon. And when we consider the energy of the moon and how the moon actually works, we are getting ready to, in the next couple days, we're actually getting ready to have a new moon. And then we'll also have a couple eclipses towards the end of the year, coincidentally enough. And so new moons are time where we start initiating new things, because it's a dark moon and it begins to gain light as, you know, time progresses, and it gains light until it's a full moon. And then there's a, you know, typically we see the manifestation of things, and then it wanes right back to a new moon. And so we're getting into an area of time where we are embarking in a new moon, which is a new beginning. And so you consider what sign the moon is going to be in this new moon cycle, and it is going to be in the sign of Scorpio, which is a sign of transformation. It brings this changing quality to our emotional nature, because it's a combination of the moon and Scorpio together. And that change and that shift in the emotional nature can cause and be very motivating for change in our lives and for movement in our lives, right? Consider the shifts that happen in water and how that actually creates life, because there's movement in water and life exists in water, and how that water in the ocean is actually influenced by the moon, and we also are influenced by the moon. So there's something happening within this time period of the next few weeks and the end of the year that is really a big shift in our lives, because this is pulling us out of our comfort zone that we've been in, and is, you know, really urging us from an emotional sense to move towards something new. And so we go from this position 8 card, we're going to go down to the 5th position, right? And the 5th position represents time and change, because it's how stability, when you add another number to stability, you get change. And in change is where you see time. And so in this context, we have the Page of Pentacles, and the Page of Pentacles is a card that is asking us, or telling us, that we have to really keep our sense of values and what's important to us as things shift. And that is ultimately like our habits, and how we put our time towards these habits is ultimately what's going to build things in our life. Virgo is a sign that's associated with, you know, preventative health. It's an earth-ruled sign, so it likes to consider, you know, service. And really, this is a question of how do we want to show up in life in a context of time and through the context of change, and where do we want to bring value to others, and is that part of this mission, and where can we be service to this big shift that's happening, and be present in that, and also take care of ourselves through the process, because it can be too easy to be swept away in daily life and forget basic self-care. And so I feel that this is reminding us that ultimately we do better when we do take time for self-care. Now, when we go from this position to the number 7 position, this is, you know, definitely a card that is, you know, it causes people a lot of concern. We have the Tower card. It is ruled by Mars, and it brings up again for me the transit that's happening right now with Mars being in Aries, and this big shift that's happening energetically right now. The Tower card is a card that tells of a unavoidable change, you know, that's happening from an outside source. It really does have a similar energetic to the Uranus planet, but it is different. Uranus is actually a higher level of Mercury, so it actually is something that brings shifts in our lives that allows us to see things in a new way. And so this is kind of, it does that in that way too, because there is this kind of lightning force in this drawing, which has a Uranian nature to it. But the number 7 in this position is all about knowledge, and this is a card that is telling us that where we have created pillars of stability in what we know and what we understand is going to be shaken quite a bit. And it's actually because this card, it represents a tower that references the Tower of Babel, which is how a civilization built language in a way to reach God. It was this tower that they built in aims to be able to reach God. And as they were approaching being able to finish it, lightning struck the tower and it came crashing down, and they learned that they were even closer to God being on the ground than they ever would have been at the greatest heights of this tower. So in that way, this change that can seem really aggressive and unwanted brings a understanding that could not be experienced or really as deeply understood unless this big change and shift happened. And so that's something that we're all going through, right? That's not something to take personally. It's not something to, beat oneself up over or to be fearful of. It's just more setting the stage of making sure that, for instance, you realize something is still going to come and there will still be something, even aside from this. And so what's interesting about, looking at the Enneagram in this way for me right now is that I feel like we are really stuck in this cycle, right? We're stuck in this like 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7. We're as a society, like we are in this mindset of like, oh shit, I really want to do this, but oh shit. And so the Enneagram in that numerical sequence, 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7, 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7, that repeats itself, is telling of where we get stuck in that dizzying cycle, right? Of not actually being able to progress towards what we are setting out to actually achieve. And so how do we actually attain what we're setting out to achieve? Well, we have to look to the other 3 numbers. We have to look to the 3, the 6, and the 9, because that's what is going to give us the ultimate self-remembering within this chaos that we're all experiencing through this doorway that we're stepping through. And so to look at the number 3, and number 3 is a neutral number, right? So it's asking us, with having this particular card in this position, we have the 4 of Wands. Okay, so if we were to look at our lives and look out the window and, we can consider, the spheres of influence that happen in our lives, right? And where we put our attention. We have our home and our family and our pets. And first of all, we have our self-care, like what we do for ourselves and with ourselves each and every day. Then a little bit outside of that, we have our family members, our pets, our household, our, things that we own. Then we have our, friends, and then we have our neighborhood or our job, or it depends, right? Like depending on your personal life, there's going to be different characters and a different order to these spheres of influence in your life. And wands are associated with our sense of will and our sense of motivation. And so this is asking us to have a neutral perspective around what's going on in our life, right? Because we can get very stuck in this idea, like what we know, right? Like what's happened this year, what we've seen, and what we quote unquote know, right? But really what is going to give us some neutrality around this is taking a glance at your personal environment and your personal spheres of influence and looking out and having a sense of gratitude and participating in that, right? The 4 of Wands is safety and security, and it is depicting of some characters that are either going to a place of respite and like resting, or they're going to a place of going back out to work or going back out to their duties. And so this card is actually asking us to have a sense of knowing when it's time to work and bust butt and when it's time to rest, because it is actually really important to have time to rest right now and to make time to rest and to have some sense of neutrality with that. That will actually bring some neutral energy to this that can get swept away in this space. Then we go from this third position, we're going to go over to this sixth position. And interestingly enough, the sixth card is associated with history and balance. And we have the Queen of Wands here, which is a fixed fire energy. It's associated with Leo. And this is a card that is asking us to set the example, to be aware of how we show up in life and have some intention with that, to be a conscious character, play a conscious role in how we interact with people, so that we can actually, be present, heart forward, and help create the, compassionate world that we want to be a part in, that our own seeds of inspiration can grow in, right? This is a person that doesn't rule by, clugging people over the head with a wand. They instead lead people by, forging ahead and using their wand as a staff, to show people the way. And then when we go to this ninth position, which is the number of completion, which is ultimately what is going to make and break our experience with everything, we have the Five of Wands. And the Five of Wands is this energetic of making a choice between whether or not you want to be combative or if you want to be, working with people in a community. So the people who are in this card are either in a place of training or they're in a place of combat. And ultimately, you have to decide where your aim is set and where your energetic is set. And that will help you to self-remember in a time where it can be really chaotic, because we all are part of a community and we're all just moving through something right now that is going to be greatly shaping us and shifting us in the future. And we won't actually be able to know what that's going to look like until the shift happens and we begin again based on that. And when we go to the number 10, which is, the crystallization of this and ultimately the new beginning, we have the Seven of Pentacles. And the Seven of Pentacles is telling us to have patience, to know that when you plant the seed, there's only a certain amount of time before that seed is going to burst out of the earth and, given everything that it needs, fruit. Like babies don't stay in the womb forever, right? Like it's a 9.5-month process, sometimes even less than that, sometimes a little bit more than that, but it always happens when we have patience. And so with this said, this character has two different colored boots, because it's one of two cards in the tarot deck that has two different colored boots, and that's because they have one foot in two different worlds, right? And so when you consider, having your foot in one area of your life and being invested in that, and then having, another foot balanced in another area of life, this is a person who, still works knowing that new things are going to come and that new things are going to happen. And they take the time to, fertilize the garden and to water the garden and to take care of the garden. And they know that when they do that, there will be fruit and there will be seed, and to have patience with that. So, ultimately, fruit will be bared, but you have to be careful not to get stuck in, feeling like you don't have any sense of control, so you just don't move forward, and also getting in this mindset of doom and gloom. Ultimately what's important is that the anchor within you carries you forward, and that you listen to your own guidance through it all, because that is what's going to help you get to this place where you can actually reap the fruit of what you are wishing for this new moon. So that is our Enneagram reading for this gateway that we're going through of 1111, where we're stepping forward towards the new moon in Scorpio on either November 13th or November 14th, depending on where you live in the world. Once again, this is the first time I've ever shared the Enneagram reading with people. I was inspired to offer readings this way just recently, probably because, you know, I have 5 planets in Scorpio, and a lot of transits are happening for me right now and inspiring me in many, many ways. But if you would like to give me feedback on this reading format, I would appreciate it. If you are interested in getting your own reading in either this format around something that you specifically are trying to move toward, or an astrological reading, please feel free to reach out to me at rootsofalchemy@gmail.com. Again, thank you for joining me. I hope you found that useful. If you'd like to reach out to me, please do. I look forward to hearing from you, and I wish you great blessings as we go through this gateway and into the unknown. Blessings to you.